So I chose parental conflict effects on children for my topic, and I focused on parental conflict in general. So not necessarily divorced parents, but just conflict within any relationship between parents. So I chose this topic because honestly, I've experienced parental conflict in my own family and seen how it has affected my siblings and I in different ways. I've also seen it impact a lot of families and people that I know, and I just feel like it's important for people to understand the impacts that parental conflict can have on children, and I just would never want to have the same impact on my own children. So, the first two articles I looked at really emphasized the mental and physical health impacts of parental conflict and talked a lot about how quality parenting includes sensitivity, nurture, support, fulfillment of needs, which all help create a positive view of self concept in the child because they feel valued and worthy of love. But a lot of the time, when there's parental conflict, there's some form of less emotional or physical involvement by the parents, which can then threaten the child's sense of security and therefore cause a negative self concept. One of the studies found that exposure to parental conflict led to higher levels of attachment anxiety and attachment insecurity. And they also found that if there is decreased parent involvement because of conflict, these anxieties are shown by feeling unworthy, fear of rejection, jealousy, anger, a lot of reassurance seeking, and then internalization of problems that are occurring in the child's life. Also, those who experience parental conflict were more likely to have somatic symptoms, which are like physical problems like headaches, stomach aches, and sleep problems, which were said to affect daily life. The other study found very similar things. They talked about how those who were raised in a family with a lot of parental conflict had lower levels of self esteem and, again, higher levels of anxiety. They also talked about how children often end up wrapped up in the middle of the conflict between their parents, having to mediate and choose sides, which in itself is very destructive to the child. They found that those who experience parental conflict are also more likely to do worse in school, have troubles with delinquency and aggression, have antisocial or isolating behaviors, and are more likely to have depression. Something that one of the articles did mention that I thought was really interesting was that some researchers claim that children as young as 18 months old show emotional distress when they are exposed to conflict environments with their parents, which is crazy to me. But they also did talk about how there are people who experience parental conflicts that are very resilient and show very few psychological problems because of it. But so it can go either way. The next article I looked at found that parental conflict can impact relationships between the parents and their children when their children are adults. So they found that those who see their parents' relationship as one with a lot of conflict were more likely to feel lower levels of closeness and support from their parents, which affect the overall quality of the relationships between parent and child, which is super interesting to me because I do feel like you can still feel close with and supported by either one or both of your parents, even if there is parental conflict, but who knows, it varies depending on the family. The last article I looked at talked about how those who experience parental conflict growing up were more likely to have interpersonal problems as adults in their relationships. It said that children of divorced parents or of chronic parental conflict showed higher rates of communication and conflict issues with their own relationships or marriages in adulthood. And they're more likely to experience instability and low commitment and other related issues. This can also carry into non-romantic relationships as well, and has been shown to lead to poor relationship satisfaction in adulthood, which is very interesting. Although these findings are super interesting and do make sense to me, I don't think this is always the case because I feel like people who have experienced parental conflict can also be more driven to have a more successful relationship or more successful relationships because they don't want to be like their parents, but that's just my personal opinion. Um, so how do you deal with this conflict? First of all, for the couples with kids, um, that are having conflict, it is super important to clarify your goals. When goals are unclear, that often leads to more conflict because neither party really knows what they want or what the other wants out of the conversation. So make sure that you have a clear understanding so that you can avoid misinterpretations and completely understand the other's perception, because I think that can be really misconstrued sometimes. Second, when engaged in relational conflict, parents should work towards managing their emotions in order to regulate the conflict and avoid destructive statements or actions, like not bursting out in anger, trying to actually understand your own emotions and be calm, because an unregulated outburst could ruin any chance for collaboration in the situation. And then third, actively listening to your partner is super important as well. Rather than outbursting with a reactive response or trying to think of the best response while the other person is talking, just listen intently to what they are saying and try to fully understand their point of view. You would want to be able to express your feelings and be listened to as well, so it should go both ways. So with the use of these conflict management tactics, I think parental conflicts can be resolved or better resolved and better managed and have less negative effects on their children. So lastly, some final thoughts. This class was really good. So perception is super important. Clarifying what you or the other person is trying to say in a conflict conversation is really important, especially nowadays with all of our technology. There's so much misinterpreted conflict, I feel like. So it's really important to make sure you fully understand what each other's perceptions and intentions are before actually responding, like trying to clarify what they're trying to say. That's really important. And then the next thing that I learned that I really think is important is that you are in control of your thoughts and emotions and actions. No one else is. Um, Events don't cause your feelings or actions, you do. So it's really important to pay close attention to how you are feeling and keep yourself from responding in a way that you will regret later. And then lastly, before I took this class, I thought that conflict was a bad thing that was to be avoided, but I have learned that when handled correctly, conflict is a really, really, really good and beneficial thing for any relationship, whether it's romantic or non-romantic. It's really important. So yeah, and then here are my bibliographies.